The next loop function will be called for. So in the search, we look for the for, and there we go. For loops are the most complex loops in PHP. They behave like the C counterparts, again C being another programming language. The syntax for a for loop is for, then we have expression, semicolon, expression 2, semicolon, and expression 3, after which we have a statement. The first expression, expression 1, is evaluated or executed once unconditionally at the beginning of the loop. So only first time round this first expression is executed. In the beginning of each iteration, expression 2 is evaluated. If it evaluates to true, the loop continues and the nested statements are executed. If it evaluates to false, the execution of the loop ends. At the end of each loop, expression 3 is evaluated or executed. So basically, the first one is only executed the first time round, second time is executed every time, and based on whether it returns true or false, the statement is going to be executed. Basically, if it returns false, the for loop ends and we go into the next line in the file, basically. And the expression 3 is also evaluated at the end of each iteration. Then we have each of the expressions can be empty or contain multiple expressions separated by commas. In expression 2, all expressions separated by comma are evaluated, but the result is taken from the last part. Expression 2 being empty means the loop should be run indefinitely. PHP implicitly considers it as true, like C language as well. So basically, when we leave the second expression as empty, basically, so we have first expression semicolon and then semicolon straight after this, that means the second expression is empty, in which case basically our for loop will run indefinitely. But as the next sentence says, this may not be as useless as you might think, since often you'd want to end the loop using a conditional break statement instead of using the for truth expression. And we will have a look at the example of this break as well shortly. Let's quickly scroll down a little bit more because I want to show you another thing. Then PHP also supports the alternate colon syntax for loops. And as you can see, the structure looks exactly the same as with the while. It's just basically rather than having curly braces, we have colon at the end of the first line, and then end for rather than end while as it was with the while, and semicolon at the end. So you can use this structure as well if you prefer to do so. Let's quickly go to our editor and have a look at the first example. So we are going to start with the for statement, and then what I'm going to do is create a variable I and associate an integer 0 with it, then semicolon. So this is our first statement. As we know, first statement only runs with the first iteration. The second iteration, it's the first statement is going to be completely ignored, and so on. So we go for the next statement. The second statement will check if I is less than 10. So this is our second statement, then semicolon, and the third statement will basically increment our I variable by 1, so post incrementing I. And in between a set of curly braces, I'm simply going to echo I, the value associated with this I variable, and then new line so that each of these values are displayed on their own lines. So basically what we are going to get is the first time around, that should be 0. Then, because we are post incrementing, the first time basically we're going to run the statement. The first statement is executed, the second statement is executed, and the third one will be executed once whatever we returned from within the container is going to be returned back. And then obviously at the end of this, the third statement is going to be executed, which means that obviously it's going to post increment this I variable, and then obviously this I will be 1 the first time around, second time around is going to be 2, and so on. So let's simply save it all and preview it in a browser. Let's refresh the page, and there we go. Fair enough, we've got starting with 0 going up to number 9 as we would expect. Okay, so that's a pretty simple example. Let's have a look at another one. What I'm going to do now, rather than having this checking for less than 10, let's check for less than 50. But rather than incrementing this just by 1, what I'm going to do is incremented by 5 with each iteration. So basically the first time around it's going to be 0. Then we are going to add 5 using this plus equals. So basically the value associated with the variable plus 5. And then again, next time around it's going to be 5 plus 5, 10, and so on, as long as it's less than 50. So let's quickly save it, refresh the page, and there we go. 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, up to 45, because the next time around it would be 50, and obviously 50 is not less than 50, in which case the for loop exits, and whatever's next, it's going to be executed. Okay, so that's another example. Let's have a look at another one. We are now going to leave the second statement empty. And what I'm going to do is go back to this post incrementing of our I variable, starting with 0 still. And as I told you earlier, if we leave, and as we obviously read as well in the documentation, if we leave the second expression empty, what's going to happen? It's always going to return true, which means this will run forever. If we left it like this now, basically the statement would go forever and it would crash the computer probably. So what we need to do is break the statement at some point. You remember break syntax from the switch statement when we're discussing conditional statements. So you can break basically the switch statement based on the case. If it returned true, you could break, and obviously then you would go outside of the switch statement. The switch statement would terminate. So what we are going to do now is check if I equals 10, and if it does, what I want to do is break this loop. So break and semicolon. That means at this point, if it equals 10, terminate the loop, basically finish this given loop. So that's one of the things. And let's continue actually with this echoing this I statement and echo this BR line. I don't know if why I removed this in the first place, but basically this break, what it will do, we will see all these items return the same way as before until we hit 10. Once it's 10, it will execute this line with a break statement, ending our, if I refresh the page, 0 to 9. As you can see, it ended when the value associated with this I variable became 10, at which point we hit this break line, and that's it. Okay, PHP statement, that's it for this for loop. Go and execute whatever you have after this for loop. Okay, so that's the break. You know now that we can break loops using the break, and I will discuss this break in the last video of this chapter as well, a little bit more. Let's now have a look at a little bit more complex example. So I'm going to remove everything that we have here. What I'm going to do is use multiple expressions for each expression. So what I'm going to do is use for, and then I'm going to use for the first expression, I'm going to create the variable a equals 0, then comma, because all these expressions can be separated by comma. For b, I'm going to set value of 5, and then separating this by semicolon. So this is our first expression containing two separate expressions separated by comma. For the second expression of this second argument of this for loop, I'm going to use a equals less than 10. As long as a equals less than 10, this loop will continue. So this is second expression. And for the third expression, what I'm going to do is, first what I'm going to do is use the b variable, and I'm going to add to it the value associated with the a variable. Then, so this is the first expression of this third argument or third expression. Then what I'm going to do is print something to the browser. And what this is going to be? It's going to be value associated with a variable of this given iteration. Then I'm going to concatenate this with the new line. So br lines. There we go, new line. And then again, another statement, which I'm going to associate with this third expression. It's going to be print, and this time I'm going to print the value associated with the b variable. And again, I'm going to concatenate it with a new line. And the last thing I'm going to do in this third expression is going to be post incrementing this a variable by 1, so 2 pluses. And semicolon at the end. Now look, I'm not using any curly brackets. Everything is within one line. It's one statement. I'm not including anything in between the curly brackets. I'm not putting colon and then end for statement at the end. It's all in one line. So this is our first expression. this is our second expression, and all this is our last third expression. So let's just have a look at this again. This first expression we know is only executed with the first iteration. All remaining iterations, this is going to be ignored. So we set in variable a with 0 and variable b with 5. Second expression checks for a given condition. As long as a variable is less than 10, we are looping. Okay, so that's our second expression. And the third expression, let's start statement by statement. First of all, we are incrementing the value associated with the b variable, or to start with, it's going to be 5. We are adding to it value associated with the a variable, and as we can see with each iteration, a will be incremented by 1. So the first time around, it's going to be 0. Then when it's run, it's going to be 1, then it's going to be 2, and so on. So obviously our second argument, second expression will always check for this. As long as it's less than 10, it's going to be looping. So the first time around, basically this 5 plus 0 will be 5. Second time around, it's going to be 5 plus 1 will equal 6, and so on. And then we are printing to the browser, which works similar way as echo, but you will see in just a moment that there is a difference. Printing the value associated with this a, so it's going to start with 0, then 1, 2, 3, and so on. And then we also printing after this, obviously we have in a new line, so after this value, we're going to have the value associated with the b printed in the browser as well. And again, new line. And obviously the last one is just post incrementing the value associated with the a variable. Let's quickly save this and preview it all in the browser. If we refresh the page, you can see we've got the first time around we got 0 and 5 because that was the original value associated with the a and b variable. Second time around, what we did, the value associated with a was 1 and the value associated with b was 6. Let's quickly go back to our editor. So this executed 1 second time around, and this executed 6 second time around, because obviously we added 1 to 5, which is the original value associated with b, and so on. It's basically every iteration obviously increments it by whatever value is associated with a variable. So a then is 2, and b will obviously be 8, then 3 and 11, 4, 15, until we reach 9 and 50, and the next iteration, because a will become 10, and because obviously if we have 10 as a, 10 is not less than 10, at which point this for loop ends. And obviously the PHP parser would go to the next line of our file and execute whatever's after. So that's how this specific loop works. So as you can see, you don't always have to have curly brackets or use this other alternate syntax with and for instance. You don't have to use it either way. You can have it all in just one line. Now, going back one, I told you why that we obviously this print works similar way to echo, as we've already obviously discussed right at the beginning of this course. But why can't we use echo? If we just use echo here and then echo, look what's gonna happen. You can see we already have highlighting here in red. If we go to the browser, refresh the page, we get this parse error, syntax error, unexpected echo, and so on. So basically, you cannot use echo in this joined kind of expression this way. It has to be print, and this is one of those places where print actually comes in handy, because you can separate all these as a separate statements with echo, basically because echo uses commas as well. As you know, you can do something like, for instance, if I just quickly echo something here, say value, you can do echo space and separate it with commas, as you can see, and then another value. That all works fine, but as you may remember, you cannot do it with a print. Now, commas here would mean that it's a separate expression, separate statement basically for the print. For echo, it's all one thing. That's why we get it highlighted if I use echo here. As you can see, echo and echo, and all this would be as one statement basically, but it can't be obviously used this way. That's why we are using print in this. I'm just going to go back basically and move all this, and that works fine. Now, another thing to discuss is this post incrementing. Can we use it with a pre-incrementing? Of course, it doesn't really matter. You can use pre-increment or post increment. Why? Because this is only run, this third expression, as you may remember, is only run once the iteration ended. So the first iteration ended, and then is when this third expression is actually executed. So you can pre-increment it or post-increment it. For the next iteration, is already going to be a number that it needs to be anyway, whether you pre-increment it or post-increment it, because the value is going to be done after the statement has executed. So it's entirely up to you. But the common way of doing this is pretty much wherever you're going to see any example is pretty much post-incremented. But you feel free, if you prefer having this plus symbol at the beginning, you can do it this way. It doesn't really matter that much. Let's now have a look at the example with the array. Let's remove all we have here and simply go for array equals, and let's associate the array with it, with the items banana. Then we're gonna go for apple and lastly peach. Okay, so we've got this array with different fruits. Now I'm going for the for statement, and inside of this for statement, and again, you can use the space, you can have it right next to it, the brackets, basically it's entirely up to you again. And then we're gonna go for I as the first expression when we associate the number 0 with it, and then we are checking if I is less than count function, and the array passed as an argument. Count basically tells you how many items there are in the array. In this specific example, there are 3 obviously items, so that will basically return 3, and we'll check against this I variable, the value associated with this variable. So that's our second statement, separated by semicolon, and I will simply be incremented by 1 with each expression. This time I'm going to use curly braces again and simply echo, and I'm going for the array and then the index. So what this will basically take, it takes the array and takes the given index, starting with 0, then it's going to be 1 and 2, obviously because there are only 3 items, and obviously arrays are 0 based, so it starts from index 0, so 0, 1 and 2. So that's what it's going to return, and then echo brtag, save it, preview it in the browser, and if we refresh the page, all looks fine. So this is pretty much what we've got in our array. The only problem with this statement is that, as you may remember, the first time around all 3 are executed. Obviously the third one is executed at the end of the statement, once the statement actually has been executed inside of the for statement, inside of these brackets basically. Then the third one is executed and the loop starts again. This condition starts obviously is executed right after. But the first statement, the first expression is only executed when the whole looping starts. So what we could do, rather than calling this count on every single iteration, because this count won't change, it's just basically returning the number of array items in the array. Why do we need to call this count function? Obviously, if we have a large, let's say, array, that would potentially slow down the whole, obviously, execution of the script, because every time we checking this second expression, this count function has to be executed, has to count how many items there are in this array. Absolutely unnecessary, obviously, step in this whole looping here. So what we can do is just cut this off and move it to the first expression, and it only will be executed once. Let's associate it with the variable, say, total equals, and then count and the array. And what we can do next is basically compare this, the value associated with the I variable, with the variable total, which was set with the first iteration. Basically, it doesn't change. It's like a constant pretty much, but it's a variable which value won't change during this iteration. Obviously, we can still overwrite it if we want to, but it's not going to change, obviously, as long as we won't overwrite it in some way. So total equals count. So this count function will only be executed with the first iteration, and then it's going to be ignored. However, the value associated with this total, the value returned from this count function will be associated with the total, which will be available with each iteration, and then we can check it this way. So rather than counting with every single iteration, we only count once, and the value is now stored with this total variable, and we can compare against it. So if we go back to the browser, it still works the same way. It's basically written in a little bit more optimized way. Now, one thing different to the while and do while statement here, which you might have already noticed is that we are actually not passing this array through to the statement itself. So we're not looping. I mean, we're still using it here, but we are not looping through this array, which means the internal pointer doesn't change at all. It's always pointing to the first item to start with and to end with as well. So we could as well use this for statement again right after, and it's going, if we go back to the browser, refresh the page, and you can see it still returns the items the same way as before, because we are not actually iterating over the array. We're retaining values from the array by using the index, which is generated through this for statement, basically post incrementing or incrementing basically this I value and passing this as an argument, in which case we are basically returning items from this array by a given index, but we're not actually iterating over the array as such. So as you can see, this way, using for statement, for loop, we are not changing the internal pointer of the array.